For this second session of day 2 of the Future of the American Child journalism training, we're going to continue the conversation about the foster care system, the child welfare system, and some of the barriers to sort of common sense programming and treatment of children and families in the system. And the best way to do that, we've found, is by thinking about the issue of kinship care, which means, do children get to spend more time in their birth families and with relatives, or are they passed around or bounced around in a dysfunctional system? Sometimes the extremes are not as truthful as they could be, but it is an issue that needs to be explored. And so we have Dr. Valerie Jackson, who is actually a co-founder of Monarch Family Services in Houston. Please go to nationalpress.org to read her bio, but what you need to know is that she's one of the nation's leading researchers, advocates, and people in the know when it comes to the issue of kinship care and why it needs to be employed more. And we are also joined by a family that has gone through this experience and has graciously agreed to come and speak with us about the issue of kinship care and what it means. And Valerie will be introducing them and telling you more about that family. So Valerie, welcome to the Future of the American Child, and thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for inviting me. Just one clarification. I am the founder of Monarch. I don't have a co-founder.
Okay.
so I founded Monarch in 2014, which I'll go through my descriptions. First off, I'm a clinical psychologist. I entered the field 23 years ago as a student and working in residential facilities in Houston, Texas. That's where I was born, raised, and I still reside and do work there. But I was working in facilities at 21. When I say facilities, it's residential treatment facilities. That was my first interaction with children in foster care. And not necessarily foster care, because they were in congregate care at the time. So these were the worst, considered the worst of the worst. They had been in the system for many, many years, and they weren't able to adapt to foster care. And so they put them in these institutional settings that looked like prisons in my perspective. And again, this is I'm 45, so this is 24 years ago. They've improved some with the look, but the practices are still the same. I also am the founder of the Adolescent Center in Mental Health Services. I founded that in 2015. It is a behavioral health center. We predominantly focus on the mental health care of children in care. However, we do offer services to general populations as well. And so I have about 12 psychologists besides myself and another 30 clinicians, mental health clinicians, that offer the treatment service end of things. And finally, the last organization I found was Initiatives for Healthy Communities in 2017, and that is community-based mental health services. So we go into the most underserved communities, and we educate on mental health conditions, treatment, and also refer them to treatment, different treatment services, and also case management, because we believe that you can address one issue, but if you're not providing that wraparound support, then healing or getting to a point of getting to a point of stabilization is not possible. So we do offer case management to deal with the psychosocial issues, but also mental health services. And so those are the 3 programs that were started. We predominantly work with biological parents as well as relative caregivers. I don't know of any other agency in Texas that works with both, because we do work with most agencies. Child placement agencies only work with the foster parents or kinship parents, but not necessarily biological parents. And then they have other agencies that only work with the biological parents to help with the CPS service plan that was explained by Alan before my presentation. But we actually work with both because we are a family first child placement agency, but just family agency, period. We have family-centered approach, and also we believe that the overriding goals of all of our services and programming is to heal from past traumas and also stabilize the home environment. Again, major focus of all these programs are mental health and case management, goes hand in hand. In 2019, that's when we organized the research team, and so it was in a partnership with University of Houston. And so we conducted a few studies. We actually came out with one manuscript recently and working on another study right behind it. And as of 2021, Monarch Family Services is the only accredited kinship agency in Texas. And I don't know if there's any other around the United States, but we're definitely the only accredited kinship agency in Texas. And so just real quick, I'm going to talk more about Monarch and later on in the presentation. But these are our program. This is our program model. Again, we have prevention services, preservation and reunification services, kinship services that work with kinship families with the home licensing and program. We have a 5% small population of unrelated families that are adoption focused. We do not have any foster parents in our agency. They have to be the 5% of unrelated, again, are adoption focused. Permanency is the answer for any of these children that have been through the system and that have been traumatized by the system. I don't know if he mentioned in one of his articles, he has a quote that I'm talking about Alan. He has a quote that I always say: I've never met a child that said, "Thank God you took me from my parents." I've never met a child in my 23 years. Or, "Thank God you took me from my family." Never met a child in 23 years that have said that. They all, where a bulk of their trauma, or most or all of their trauma comes from, is the removal process and then the system involvement. And so anyway, we have post-permanency services. The post-permanency services are for any of the families that achieve permanency through our program. We provide them ongoing service and support, even past the age of 18. It doesn't matter. We want to make sure that you thrive in adulthood. Also, the family thrives because we have services and support for the families as well. Because the cute little 5-year-old will become 15 and they will have their own mind. And so sometimes support is needed. And the idea is not just to get you to adoption or get you to some type of permanency, but it's to keep this family unit together for the continuum of until adulthood and beyond. And then finally, we have the research end of Monarch. And so we do kinship research only, and we are, and the whole idea is to design a system that really supports kinship care, family connections, family of origin. And that goes to, you're not going to be able to see this. We'll send this to you. But that goes to our theory of change. Our theory of change, all the supports and services, all are geared toward increasing healthy placement with a family of origin, whether that's the biological parent or that's going to be the family members that support that unit, or sometimes there's another extension called fictive kin. These are neighbors, church members, friends, aunties that are not biologically connected, but they know the family, and some people are far, even out of state. So the idea is to access every connection to that child possible, exhaust it. Exhaust that search. Again, it could be kinship or it can be fictive kinship. Anyone that knows that child, that loves that child, can be a support during the family crisis that is being experienced with this involvement with the child welfare system. So again, our theory of change is always going to be increase the placement and the stability of children and families within that family of origin. All right, now we're going to get into the nuts and bolts of the presentation. Some of this stuff you've already heard. It was already mentioned in the first presentation. I take similar approaches, but that means that it's valid. So I'm about to confirm everything that Alan said. All right, so yes, America has a dark history of family separation. Okay, very dark history. And specifically in the BIPOC communities, where disproportionality, we hear this all the time. It's something that is discussed. Some plans are put in place. There's a lot of think tanks, groups, but we still sit here today in our chairs and have the most significant disproportionality, especially in the state of Texas, when it comes to system involvement. And so, again, a lot of the trauma that you hear that these children, here keep traumatized kids, trauma-informed, trauma. The trauma that most of these kids experience is system involvement. And I have 3 real-life examples that are real close to me because I adopted 3 kids out of the system at 3 different time periods. But the last child who I adopted in 2021, he had been through, he's only 9 years old. He had already been through 17 placements. He doesn't even remember removal at age 4. He doesn't remember that life, but he remembers all 17 of the placements, the 5 hospitalizations, the residential treatment for a year, and then finally in my home. And that's a whole storyline for another day, how he ended up in my home. But because he was really in my agency with another family, they gave up on him. And so it's I'm saying in my mind, no one would adopt him, so I took him home. So that's a whole other story. But his trauma is, he doesn't even remember removal. He doesn't remember the horrific things that are written in the file. All he remembers is everything that was done, all the trauma he experienced with each removal. Each removal is a trauma. He only remembers the trauma that he experienced in the child welfare system, and he's Hispanic. My second child is also Hispanic, and I got him at 6. He's Hispanic and African American, so he's biracial. And he had been through, he had went to the system at 2. I adopted him at 6, but he had also went through 10 placements and a lot of adoption rejects. And at age 6, they already put on his file that he possibly was not going to get adopted, and this was going to be possibly a kid that aged out because 1, he's minority, 2, he has autism, 3, he had a lot of behavior problems. And today, 3 years later, you wouldn't even tell he was system involved at all. That's what stability and healing does. My other child was 2 when she was adopted. Of course, she doesn't remember any of the trauma of CPS or anything. I'm the only mom she knows, but she has secondary trauma from the experiences that her brothers have expressed to her. And so she has a heart for them and have a heart for this work. And that's why when I created Monarch, I said, this is not a foster care agency. This is a permanency-seeking agency because kids don't heal in foster care. And I have gone off on a tangent. Let's go back to family separation. All right, family separation. So moreover, the practices intertwined in our legacy in America with family separation, specifically in our BIPOC communities, indigenous communities, the American Indian residential schools, African Americans, as it was mentioned by Alan, the slavery, and also immigrants, separation at the border. I went back. I didn't mean to do that, sorry. All right, so with American Indian, for those that haven't heard about it, in the 1700s to the 20th century, they were civilizing American Indians to be more westernized. So they were changing the language, changing the culture and the practice within the children in these communities. They were segregating them into, they called it had a nice name to it. It was called boarding schools. I don't even use that in my presentation because I said that sounds too lovely. So there were actually residential schools where they removed the children from the parent and put them in these residential schools in order to westernize them, okay? And if parents would refuse to turn over their children for these programs, to these residential schools, then they would use coercion, they would use manipulation, as well as threatening them. You've got to give them up because they have to be westernized. All right, so that was the American Indian experience in a general sense of family separation. Of course, we know the history of African Americans and slavery. Enslaved mothers and fathers would often be separated from their children. The federal government even had mandates and laws that protected this practice. The slave owners could do whatever they want because these were just property. So we can separate kids left and right, and the parents go here, the children go there. And the idea was to simply, the idea of the family is simply less important for people of color. But just as in the foster care system, once the Civil War, at the end of the Civil War and slavery was abolished, what was the first thing you think those children and families did? They went to seek each other out. Same thing happens in the foster care system. We separate these kids from their mothers, their fathers, their families, put them through the foster care system. As soon as they age out, what is the first thing you think they do? They go look for those families. They go look for those relatives. They want that connection. And unfortunately, or whatever, fortunately, a lot of adoption cases happen like that too. Right now I have a 12-year-old and 2 9-year-olds. My 12-year-old is questioning, like, where are my family? When am I going to meet them? I want to see them. And when I adopted her 11 years ago, well, give or take, 10 or 11 years ago, there was mandates that once termination happened and they were going to facilitate adoption, it's a closed adoption. You cannot communicate with biological families. There's no contact, which is silly, because now then you have this kid that now is 12 and questioning. She's like, Mom, I don't look like you. I have different personality. I have a different personality type and different interests. I wonder where that comes from. And unfortunately, because how the system had things in place, or our practices were in place, I have no idea where her family is. But I do plan to do a seek and search to give her that resolve, because she's going to always question until she has resolve. And many of them do. Again, I have a lot of adoption cases where they're adopted, they live with these families, have all these opportunities. As soon as they can, some of them run away and go and run to their biological family in order to have the connection. Okay, so, and lastly, there's Latina. Of course, the zero tolerance immigration policy that was in 2018, where asylum seekers where children under the age of 18 were handed over to HHS, which is CPS. And then there were reports that 2,342 children were separated at the border from their parents between the time period of May 5th, 2018 and June 9th, 2018. Still currently, there's a little bit over 900 parents that have yet to be reunified with their children to this moment as we sit here. Families are still being separated at the border, and the justification now is that they're suspecting gang activity, and they feel that this is best for the children to be separated from their families. My question to you, we're going to take a pause for a moment, and I'm going to ask you, why do the government policies require the removal of children from these families? So we heard about 3 different instances where government requires it. So we're going to take it from a common sense moment. Why do they do this? Why do they think this is best for families? Yes?
I mean, the common thread there is that those are BIPOC families, so, paternalism, white supremacy, even if that's not too strong a term.
Yeah. But why does it make sense? Like, why do you think, as policymakers sit in their offices and make these policies that separate families, why does it make sense for them to separate families?
I'll just say Edward in Black. I think maybe the saviorism mentality, or they don't want the responsibility to fall on them in case something happens to the child. They feel like they could do a better job of providing a life that child needs.
Hi, maybe to crush out the culture and assimilate them.
I think Alan mentioned the liability, that the government feels that, it just wants to reduce liability in all cases if they take kids away before anything worse happens or whatever.
Okay. Well, I have a simple answer. It doesn't make sense. Okay, that's it. All right. We're done. No, anyway, it doesn't make sense. I mean, if you think about it logistically, it does not make sense. There's no reason to separate families. There's no reason to remove a child away from their family. You should support them, support that family unit in their struggles. There's no reason. They have good answers, but there's no reason. That's the common sense of it all. There's no reason to separate families. Okay, so I did my job here, no, I'm saying, but I have more to go. So, all right, policies and practices, child welfare bills that have supported relative caregivers. So, named a few. Well, this is all of them, actually. So we're going to go through it real quick. So approximately about 30% of children in conservatorship. Conservatorship means that the state has conservatorship of the children, live with people that are considered relatives. In Texas, the percentage of these relatives correlate with the national numbers. So nationally, it's about 30 to 35%. In Texas, it's about 30% as well. And so most of the conservatorship happenings are here in the southern states. And so, and of course, as we keep stating, overrepresentation of African Americans and people of color represent these numbers in conservatorship. Okay, so in 1980, Adoption Assistance and Child Welfare Act. So this is the act that really mentioned kinship care for the first time, and it mandates that the child welfare systems do explore family members as a possibility. And so, and agencies had to make reasonable efforts at avoiding unnecessary removals, and also it had to be justified. In 1997, we had the 1997 Adoption and Safe Families Act. Alan mentioned that. Public concern that children remained in foster care way too long, because as it states in Texas standards, it's supposed to be 12 months. With an extension of 6 months for a child for a parent to work a case in CPS and then be returned to care. The average stay of children in foster care in Texas right now is 3 years. All right, and we have a large percent, about close to 1,100 children every year age out of this system after being in the system for over 5 years, 5 to 7 years. Okay. So there's mandate that each state make effort to, in this act, make effort to find placement and give preference to relatives. In 2008, Fostering Connections and Success allows grandparents finally, after all these years, to get assistance with payments and also get guardianship and care for the children or their relatives as foster parents and committed to on a permanency basis. Before this act, what it was, you identify a family member, CPS say, sayonara, I'm out. You figure it out, okay? And so, but now when this act came in place, now they can go ahead and seek assistance and support. 2014, the Prevention of Sex Trafficking and Strengthening Families Act is a provision where relative caregivers ensure that if something happens to them or they are unable to provide care, then the contingency plan is to seek out other relatives. And typically in these permanency, all the time in these permanency settings, kinship parents are asked what is their contingency plan. And so what the state has to do is seek out that contingency person, or that person that they have on their contingency plan, and typically they are relatives, and the child must be first considered for that relative before they seek out unrelated families. If the primary caregiver is unable to provide care or they die. Because again, majority of our caregivers are grandparents and they're aging grandparents. So I've had a few cases where grandparents have passed after permanency was achieved. Okay, 2018 Family First Prevention Service Act. This is a current mandate that reduces children in congregate care settings such as residential treatment centers, group homes, shelters, I'll call them prison-like environments, and seek out more for them to stay with their family. Whether that's biological parents or relative caregivers. And so, unfortunately, Texas is a slow-moving vessel on this particular mandate. They were supposed to start the process of adopting the Family First Act in 2021. We barely have any movement. And they were given $50 million to begin the implementation process. I asked them yesterday when I was in Austin, I said, what has been done with the $50 million? They said, oh, well, we've had think tanks talk sessions and kind of, trying to figure it out. I said, well, it takes $50 million to come up with a thought. Okay, so little movement has been done And this mandate came down in the federal government in 2018. And they actually, Texas asked for an extension. They got an extension to 2021, received the first $50 million to come up with implementation plan. We're moving very slow. Okay, let's just say we're moving very slow. So other states are more progressive. 2023, Biden administration proposed for kinship families. This just happened in March of 2023. $20 billion over a decade to assist kinship families. Increase the number of foster children who live in kinship care that they receive reimbursement by the state. More money for programs such as Kinship Navigator programs. Kinship Navigator programs assist not only kinship families that have involvement with child welfare system, but also families that do not, which make up the biggest percentage of families that are taking care of their relatives, those that do not have child welfare involvement. That's the biggest percentage in kinship care. So with involvement, he's proposing to give money towards those programs, as well as larger amounts of assistance for families that are relative caregivers. Now, Alan did say that it's on average about $900 a month if they get licensed. It's really $840 a month if they get licensed. And it all depends on level. They have this thing in Texas called level of care, and that means just the behavior issues that they have can increase the amount that a caregiver receives and whatnot. And so with this bill, they would even get, this is not a bill. With this proposal, they would get even a larger percentage than a regular foster parent. If they get $840, then they would probably get $900 now if this passes through Congress. All right, all this monies and waivers come from Title IV-E waiver program. And so this money has been designated only for licensed, not only, but predominantly for licensed foster care. As you've probably already heard, the same regulations that an unrelated family has to meet is the same exact regulations that a kinship family meets. Absolutely unfair. Because for one, as you will hear, there's no preparation for kinship families. They haven't been thinking or are considering taking in more children. They get a call one day out of the blue saying, you need to take these kids, you have 2 hours to say yes or no. Otherwise, we're going to put them in foster care. That's it. Unrelated families have thought about it over months, years. Hey, I think I want to do this kind thing, a nice thing. So there's planning in it. There's preparation. They don't have the same luxury to plan and prepare. It's a quick call. It's a yes or a no, and at that point, that you're obligated to that yes. You're also obligated to that no, the guilt of the no as well. And so, but the way it's written in Title IV-E must meet the same exact standards as an unrelated family. Also it limits the ability to create, the funding limits the ability to create a real kinship program. Most agencies that want to have a kinship model, they would have to seek other funding because the Title IV-E does not accommodate a real thorough, robust kinship program within agencies. And also compared to children from non-relative foster care, children placed with unlicensed kin receive very few services, but they seem to be more committed and less likely to discharge than the unrelated families, and also to reenter care, foster care. If they're with a relative, they're least likely to reenter foster care. But the Title IV waiver does not support kin care properly. All right, foster care outcomes. He already talked about a lot of the outcomes. So if a child goes through foster care, that wonderful system that has been established and perpetuated for many, many years, what he said was absolutely on point. Black children in Texas experience higher rates of placement disruption than their white counterparts, meaning that they have more placement moves. I met a few children that had been in foster care for over 7 years, and they've also been through 50 plus placements. That is not uncommon. for them to go through 50 plus. Well, my child now, he was on his way to be that 50 plus placement child if he would have aged out of foster care. He's only 9 years old and had already had 17 placements. So this definitely aligns. Among children in foster care, males are more likely than females to be removed, partly due to behavior, and several studies suggest that compared to the general population, former foster children have poor physical health and lower self-esteem, are less happy, less satisfied with life. And youth in foster care are least likely to graduate from high school, and also are more likely to get arrested. There's a Cradle to Pipeline study that was done years ago, 2010, I believe, that states that the prison system in Texas particularly, 80% of the population had went through the foster care system. Not aged out, not all of them aged out, but 80% of the prison population in Texas at some point went through the foster care system. And it's in the male population, 80%. I think for the female population, it was like 50%. But 80% in the Cradle to Pipeline study, 80% of them went through the foster care system. So what does that tell you? Probably the system are not that great of parents. Foster care is bad for your health, basically. And so he actually already told you these stats. I guess we got similar stats. But 7 times more likely to experience depression, 6 times more likely to have behavior problems, and also anxiety, 5 more times to have anxiety, attention deficit disorder, and twice as likely to suffer from learning disabilities, delays, obesity, asthma, and speech problems. So foster care essentially is bad for your health. I'm sorry. All right, benefits of kinship care. So in kinship research, it says that it's been studied more often now as it becomes more discussions and more talks about the benefits of kinship care. So what we see in kinship care is a reduction of trauma after removal because they're going to a familiar place. So there's not this awkwardness of going into a stranger's home, being placed in having to understand the nuances and the culture and what are the rules. There's a comfort in the familiarity. So that in turn means that the trauma, the system-involved trauma is significantly less. There's improved mental health outcomes, also fewer behavior problems and social outcomes, better educational outcomes and educational stability, greater placement stability and higher levels of permanency. So majority of these homes that they're initially placed in, as you'll hear from today, they achieve permanency. If that's what the goal is. Because again, in some of these cases, they are returned back to the biological parent. Better cultural, ethnic, racial, and traditional connections, stronger ties to child's biological family. One thing about unrelated adoption and foster care, there are very sparse findings that the biological parent is still involved and they still have connections. With kinship care, in most cases, biological parents are still involved in some type of way. The child is still able to have that connection. And it makes their life satisfaction much higher. Greater placement satisfaction for children and youth and feeling like they belong. You want to feel that they belong. People want to feel like they belong and that they're considered. Kinship care should generally be prioritized and supported. Still to date, it's not as supported as it needs to be. Again, it is the idea is that they'll get better over there, not in this impoverished situation. Again, I've never met a child to date that said, thank God I was removed from my family. Still have not. Still looking, but I have not met a child to date. And I've probably encountered over a good 10,000 to 15,000 children in foster care at this juncture in my life. And I have yet to meet a child to say, thank God I was removed from my family. So what that says is that we must support this. Kinship caregivers need better and more equitable access to financial resources and services than non-kinship foster parents. Again, it's not equitable at this point. Unrelated foster parents get more support than kinship family. Because again, we have there's still that outlook that that's them, they're undereducated, they're impoverished, they cannot provide. If they were placed over here, then maybe they have these opportunities. And I've been in several, yes.
I want to make sure I'm understanding. So like the federal laws that have been passed support this idea of kinship is preferable. We should seek out kin, but they just financially are not supporting it.
Their policy has not hit practice yet. Okay? There's policies out there. It's just not practiced because we still have these discriminatory ideas of BIPOC families. And I say we as a general population. They can't give, they can't provide. There's no way they're going to fare better in that circumstance. The same grandmother that raised that daughter that has a drug addiction is now raising these grandkids. What do you think is going to happen? Right? And so that's the thought. Is that the reality? No, statistics does not support that. Statistics don't support the discrimination. Yes.
We're talking about closed adoptions. When we're talking about closed adoptions, what is the criteria for that to happen? Are there circumstances where a biological family says, I want to maintain contact with my child, and they're told you cannot? I know that's a thing based on our reading. I kind of saw that, but that wasn't like, I don't think that kid was adopted, so.
Okay. So they are, the state of Texas, I can only speak for Texas. The state of Texas is becoming more open to the idea of having ongoing connections with the biological parents. Open. I didn't say, again, we have policy, but not practice, but they're becoming more open to the idea. One program we have at Monarch is called Texas Permanency Outcome Project. But we're we're different agencies, so we're actually making sure that the relationship is healthy between the biological parent and the kinship parent. What is happening on a much smaller scale is making sure that there's a connection between the biological parent and the foster parent or the adopting parent. That's not happening. That's happening on a very, if it's happening, I don't know about it. And so it's not really, that's what's needed. But there's not like a policy written saying the biological parent must not be involved. Those are mostly decisions that I've witnessed in courtrooms. The judge will verbally say that terminating parental rights, no contact of the parent anymore. The child is now with the Colts family. And so it's not so much a policy, but it's a practice to keep the biological parent away. And I've heard that in court hearings more than anything else. Yes.
Dr. Jackson, I'm Maria Garnolado with W9J. Hola. How would the kinship system work in an abolition framework that the professor talked about, Professor Allen? And how, could this be seen as like the alternative?
The alternative, yeah. I don't know about the abolitionist approach, but I do know this is the way that, if we're talking about answers and solutions for a problem, not just completely wiping it out, this is the direction that the child welfare system needs to go. More family-centered. And because, again, there's tons of research about the negative impacts of removal, but we keep removing. We keep removing. And we keep removing, and we keep moving, and we keep moving. Every move for a child is a trauma. Again, my 9-year-old has no idea, doesn't remember anything about his biological parents or reason that CPS removed him. But all the trauma from age 4 until 9, well, I got him at 8. At 8 is horrific. And all that was system trauma. It had nothing to do with the 0 to 4. His mom was using heroin, and she will leave them every now and then, and people will report. But he doesn't remember any of that. He don't remember being left or anything like that. But he does remember when that foster parent pushed his head against the wall to where it broke the sheetrock, and he remembers being put outside, locked in a shed as a punishment. He remembers, such so forth and so on. He remembers that stuff.
I have often wondered about whether it was possible to quantify that and to say child A was removed from their family because the mother left him home alone. And by the time he was 18, he'd been in the hospital 8 times. I wonder if it would make any difference if someone was able to compile the original offense versus the amount of trauma or abuse children went through.
Oh,
If
I
it
mean,
could-
you can't even compare it. There's no comparative analysis.
that's what I mean about
It's-
common sense. I don't
it's
understand.
Like, it doesn't make, it's no comparative. Again, he doesn't even remember that. And the state of Texas spends anywhere from $5,000 to $7,000 a month on a foster child, right? And that we're not talking, and here goes the trickle down. This is the funny part of the trickle down, right? So the state of Texas allocates about $5,500 to like $7,000 for a basic child. Much more if we haven't, if we're talking about an intense child, it's about $15,000, right? Guess how much of that hits the child? Actually, they're giving a foster parent $840. So look at the trickle down of that. So the courts get that, the CPS system gets that, the agency gets that, the CASA worker gets that. Then we get a trickle down effect to where the bottom that is actually brought to the child or to the family is $840. What if we took that same, or even you don't need that much, just if you give, like he said, $1,000 towards, let's use Noah as an example, to his mother who had a substance abuse addiction. She was young, she was impoverished, she didn't have the right amount of social support. What if they gave $1,000? Probably not hand her over $1,000, but give $1,000 a month worth of service. $1,000 a month of support. We'll pay your, since we know we have a drug addiction, we'll pay for your rent for this month. We'll get, make sure you get connected with food stamps, Medicaid for all the kids, and we'll put you through a job training program so you can have stable employment. So what if that $1,000 a month went to supporting that family, and then we use another entity, let's say put $500 more. She had a mom she was estranged to because of whatever reason, bring that grandmother in as a support system, give them family therapy. Noah would not be in my house. Noah would not be in my house right now. He would not be my child. Actually, none of my kids would be my kids if this would have happened. So we start off with $5,000, $5,500 a month. By the time it gets to the child, it's $840. But all these other entities got paid. Like you said, it's a scam. It's a scam. Yes.
Hi, I'm Kayla Roeder from Street Sense Media. This is kind of an existential question, but why, because the system doesn't make sense and it's doing more harm than good, why are we still doing it? Why is the government still pushing this?
Because there's a lot of people that are benefiting from the system. And we're not talking about the families. There's a lot of people benefiting. Again, you got court systems involved. You have CASA, you have CPS as a department, you have just a lot of people benefiting. And I'm in a lot of my colleagues are not me, meaning that other agencies are not me. And I sit in these meetings and they talk about how the foster care reimbursement rates are too low, but it's never saying they're too low for the family. It's too low for what the agency's getting. Hilarious, because I'm like, oh, wait a minute, what are we here for? You're sitting on a panel, first off, promoting foster care. Okay, like foster care redesign. The agencies need to make more money. The agencies need to so we can do the work, right? And I'm like, no, you need to sell the $2 million building you have. And you need to, and then you maybe more efficiently do the work. Okay? And so it's the way the money is allocated that people support this system so that they can benefit from the system, but it has nothing to do with Miss Margarita and her family. They get the crumbs that's left. Like, okay, we're doing this, all this, and here you go, family. They get the crumbs, what's left of it. Because again, my colleagues are fighting for this foster care system to sustain. They're fighting for it because they've benefited for so many years. I mean, we have agencies, you pull their 990s, These are $100 million agencies, $50 million agencies, $30 million agencies. And then you look at the stats, how many families they've served in foster care. 300 kids, 400 kids, $100 million agency. 400 kids were served in the foster care system. And that's all and most of them, that's all they offer. They don't have like the wraparound services we have. They just have foster care. All right, so just real quick, actually right after this is when we are going to bring in Ms. Margarita. Okay, so Monarch Family Services, again, I'm the founding member of Monarch Family Services. I serve as a CEO. I still work in my agency, meaning that I work with families still. I still see families as a psychologist, the whole genre. So, but we want to deliver compassionate professional services to our families, and we are family focused, and we provide integrated, comprehensive services to the full family spectrum. We are providers of the Child Protective Services, so we are contracted for some of the services that we provide, some of the services I write grants for. The agency has the following programs. We do have prevention services that really work with informal caregivers, not system involved. Preservation reunification services, kinship and unrelated adoption, and post-permanency services. So real quick, the prevention services, and it's really small and you'll get this, but what we offer is we offer this is unrelated families, not system involved, but they need a lot of support. So this is basically our Kinship Navigator program. I just don't call it Kinship Navigation because we don't have funding for Kinship Navigation. I just write grants for the different services we offer, which is case management, advocacy and education, mental health services, because we have, again, the robust mental health program, case management, as well as we provide community referrals through our case management program. Preservation reunification, we're the only agency that I know of that works with a biological parent. So we do have all of the services that are required by the biological parent on the CPS service plan, because I believe continuity of care. So we have all of the services that are required. So we have the psychological services, outpatient substance abuse, we have the batterer intervention and prevention program, intensive case management, parenting classes, supervised visitation. The one that's not represented here is the Texas Permanency Outcome Project. Again, that will be for the biological parent, where the kinship caregiver is taking care of the child, and we work them all into a support system. Because a lot of times there's been a years of dispute, and so what we're trying to do is improve communication between the two parties, put the child in the center, and try to work out a short and long-term plan of compromise and agreement for the child. Next, we have the Kinship Permanency Program. So basically, we license kinship families through the silly licensing process of the Title 4E. It's silly because you're going to hear from Ms. Marguerite why it's so silly, because they have to go through the same requirements as a unrelated family, but we help them because we do pay for all the upfront costs like fingerprints and stuff like that, and safety equipment, and we do provide them case management services, of course, psychological services and support. We have a crisis intervention team because a lot of these children are coming out of the system, so that's where their crisis, again, they're traumatized from the system, and so a lot of them have behavior issues that sometimes the kinship caregiver aren't able to handle. So we do have a whole crisis team that consists of our therapist, a psychologist, a psychiatrist, case manager, as well as a parent coach. And so I'm sure I'm missing something else, but we have all that stuff. And finally, then we also have post-permanency. Post-permanency is so important because the CPS is out, CASA is out, they finished getting money, everybody got all their money and they're out. CASA, court, CPS, all that, so they're gone. We don't leave. We tell the families if anything becomes awry and this after permanency, please call us. Do not return these kids back to care. Since 2014, I've never had a kid return to care, ever. And we follow all of our families. We call all of them every year. We invite them to events every year. We wrap them in to our family unit at Monarch. And so we have had 0 returns. And we've provided permanency for over 500 children since 2014. And so, and we've never had a return. But we've had lots of calls post-permanency. They've had lots of problems, but we have mediated all of them. And we work with consistently about 50 families at a time. There's no limit. I'm just saying it's like the number, it seems to stay at 50 families in our post-permanency program. And then research. Research is important. I'm a psychologist. I don't practice as much working with clients individually. So in 2019 is when I said, okay, I have to stay relevant as a psychologist. I'm going to lose that skill. And so I started working in partnership with University of Houston, conducting research. And so our initial research is called Grandma Needs Help. And so I just finished a manuscript. It's in editing right now. And it's the importance of social support in kinship families. So we interviewed 8 kinship caregivers, and they were recruited from our agency. And we conducted structured clinical interviews. We developed questions and themes out of the interviews and theories about, in order to analyze the data. We looked at the different levels of social support based on a researcher called Barrera's research. And he defined enacted, perceived, and social embedded social support. And based on those interviews, we evaluated those. The findings were rated by the researchers. I had a research team, so I had a few research assistants. And so we evaluated it. And the findings just provide specific action on what kinship caregivers categorize as support. And so we have a whole, like I said, manuscript on that. I'm in second phase right now of kinship research, working with Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, and we're looking at, basically, it's looking at why, so kinship caregivers typically are low income, older, and have limited resources. But what we're trying to answer the question is why only 6% of kinship caregivers that are eligible to apply for the foster care stipend or foster care service, foster care, whatever, stipend, participate. So that means that 94% don't. They say, I don't want to go through the licensing process. So now we're evaluating the why. I mean, I went through the process 3 times. I know why they're not doing it, but that's anecdotal. But we want to answer the question of why they're not going through the process. 94% are not going through the process, and only 6% are actually participating in the process of licensing. Ms. Margarita participated in the process, and she's going to talk about her experience. And so great segue. And so we're going to administer at least 1,000 surveys, working with the department of giving us the clients that have turned down to go through the licensing process. Again, they're low income, they have limited resources, et cetera, but they said, no, I'm not going through that process. I'm not doing that. I'm going to finish right quick. And then, so then we're going to randomly select about 100 to do specific focal interviews with them, and then evaluate the responses of the similarities and differences between the BIPOC and non-BIPOC caregivers. And the findings of this project, we're hoping, will inform the state of Texas how best to communicate the home licensing process, because Title IV is not changing anytime soon. I know Karen Bass out of California, she used to be a congresswoman, but now she's a mayor, but she was really attacking Title IV, like heavily, trying to get a separate waiver specifically for kinship caregiver. It's been viewed, proposed, hasn't been knocked down, but we still got years for that to be passed. And so we have to follow these regulations. So how can we communicate this licensing process better to these families? How can specifically with BIPOC, with all the generational family separation, how can we get their trust again? How can the government get their trust? Probably can't, but still. But how can the government, they can trust the process in order to involve the process and the resources that are available to them? Also, what's the best method to support kinship caregivers that have the greatest needs? Because the ones that are, the individuals that are turning down the licensing process, regardless of them being eligible, are the ones that have the greatest needs. Like, they really don't have the resources to take care of 6 to 7 children, but they're not going through the licensing process. That's what our research is on. And now, without further ado.
Sorry, Dr. Jackson.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's okay. I'm Henry Gasson with the Christian Science Model. I just wanted to ask if you could speak to, sort of from a system-wide perspective, the effects that the adoption industry or demands for people seeking to adopt children. Like, there's a high demand there and maybe not as much supply, if that's the word.
Not in public adoption. We have about 4,000 kids that are eligible for adoption, and most of them have been sitting on the adoption eligibility listing for at least 3 years. So.
Oh, wow. I mean, I've written about ICWA quite a lot, and what you hear about that system is that there's
For the
incredible.
you're probably thinking about from the infants and the babies and
Yeah.
the under 3-year-olds. I mean, they don't stay. There's not. I wouldn't say they're passing over. Well, I don't know, but again, this is anecdotal unless I look at the research. But I wouldn't say they're passing over kinship to provide these because they don't. There's no. They benefit. The state benefits. The agencies benefit just as much if the child is adopted with family or if they're adopted with unrelated. There's no greater benefit. You know what I'm saying? So it's the same exact pay scale, whether they let the grandmother adopt or if they let the unrelated family adopt. Now, there are 4,000 kids that are eligible for adoption in Texas, but yes, those kids either have if they're young, they have severe disabilities, and they're older. They're over the age of 7. And they've been system involved for more than 3 years, like I said. But I wouldn't say that there's like a conspiracy to keep, to funnel kids this way or opposed to that way, only because there's no financial benefit either or for, except one thing is that if kids get adopted faster, that funding pipeline, it starts to decrease for agencies, right? Because if you're like us, we have like a very fast churn. Like we keep most of our families for no more than like 6 months. Most agencies keep their families for years because they're channeling, because there's foster care, so they're putting kids in there. So once you develop them as a licensed home, they're keeping. That's why a lot of this is another thing we're gonna have to move on. But another reason why most agencies don't want to work with kin, because I always hear it's not financially feasible. You use all this money to develop them, and you're only keeping them for less than 6 months. So you're only getting foster care payments for that family for like 6 months, and so they feel that they don't break even from the development process, so they don't want to work with kin. To where if you have a foster parent, I develop you as a foster parent, I can keep you for years and put all kinds of kids in your home for years, and I'll keep benefiting off of you. Like I said, the foster care giants in Texas, like Arrow, DePelchin, Pathways, ACH, others, they do not want to see foster care go away. They got $50 million, $60 million, $100 million budgets that depend on you as a foster parent to keep putting kids in there.
And I've been covering this issue for the past 20, and that is the first time that's clicked for me. The industry aspect of it.
Yeah, they don't want to.
If you spend all that money
on developing a family,
developing a foster care family,
they'll say these things in open forums, and I'm just
and
like,
I'm naive.
I'm like, wow,
yeah.
do you really you come up with Margaret? You really are saying that you're here for families and children, I'm here for families and children, but then you're complaining that you're only keeping a family for 6 months because they're reaching permanency. And you spent maybe $3,000 to develop the home, staff, you okay? Yeah. Staff and all that, and you're saying you're not going to break even on that family. Thank you for coming. I'm going to let you introduce yourself, and then we're going to talk about the, I have 3 questions for you. So.
Hello, my name is Margarita Arizmendi, and I adopted through Kinship, through my niece and nephew.
All right, first question. How did the children come to your care? So tell your story.
Well, I got a call one day, and their mom is my half-sister, and she was crying. CPS was involved in her home, and she needed help. And so I was like, okay, stop crying. Just give them my number, have them call me, see what I can do, you know. And so they did. They called me immediately, and I gave them. I guess you give your social, I don't know, you give them information about you. And so they check you out, they call me within the hour. Can you pick them up within the hour? And I'm like, they were in Dallas. We're originally from Dallas, but I've been here for 16 years, 17 years, whatever. And so I said, well, I can be there tomorrow. I have a 9-hour drive, and there was 4 of them. And it was a 17-year-old, their older sister, their older brother, 16, Carmen was 13, and Zeke was 9. So I go pick them up, and I just did it. And when I'm driving back with them, I'm looking through the rearview mirror, and I have all these kids in the car, and they're like miserable. I'm like, oh my God, well, like, what did you do? This is like a lot, you know. But the oldest one, she aged out and went back with her mom. The older brother, he he lives with another family here. He's already aged out, but he stayed with another family, his best friend's grandmother. He started doing drugs, and through the COVID, when we were locked in the house, he was coming out and having someone bring him drugs there to the house. And so I had to choose whether I wanted them to be involved in that or remove him from the home. And so we removed him from the home. He got another placement elsewhere, and we continue with them.
Okay,
So that's kind of.
thank you. And what were some of the triumphs, and then we'll talk about the challenges of going through the system,
Well, it's
or being involved with the system, rather?
well, it's a lot. I mean, it's a lot when you're involved in the system, and they're constantly coming to the house. You have different agencies coming through, CASA's meeting with them, and they're meeting with them. They did give them services as far as they got a counselor and stuff like that that they got to talk to someone about. The children actually did better once the 2 older kids were removed, because the 2 older kids just wanted to go home. When the 17-year-old came, I tried to put her in school here. She had 0 high school credits. She was 17-year-old. She had already dropped out of school since junior high school, kind of 8th grade or something, so she had no credits. The 6-year-old had half a credit in high school, so I had to put her in an alternative school so she could even go to school, and he started high school. And so when you have also the parent in their ear all the time, I guess trying to keep them uncomfortable, keep them not comfortable, not let themselves, this is their new home, for now. While she was trying to get services, it makes it really hard because they were always upset. Like, they would be happy we'd go do something, they were in a good mood, and then they talked to their mom, we went here and this and that, and immediately that outing, whatever it was, now had a negative aspect on it. So I think it was hard on all the children for a long time.
I have a follow-up question to that. In your involvement, did they ever try to work with the mom and you and the kids, like in like a therapeutic?
No, they didn't. Due to the fact that she was in Dallas and we were here, it made it really difficult. She was going through services over there, but again, how you say, like, she has to go to work or go to the classes. I mean, they do the same thing to here. I have my own business, so I make my own hours. So for me, like, okay, we have an appointment today at the house, or the kids have to be to this. It was a little bit easier for me to work around that. But when you have a job, I mean, to have to be out of the job so many hours to do the services, I mean, it would make it hard.
Yeah. I was just thinking like they would.
But
give
in
you
their case, the children had already had 7 different CPS involvements, and they never removed them until the last time.
Okay.
They always kept them there, but they'd give her services like jerk services and family services and whatever. But immediately, as soon as CPS goes back, it appeared that everything would go back to being exactly the same as it had until.
And what were some of the, I guess, like the triumphs, like the like?
Oh, my kids.
Your aha moments.
My kids are awesome. Carmen just got inducted into the National Honor Society. She's an 11th grader, and Zeke is a student. I just got a letter, which I was only able to read halfway through because they were talking about how he's done so well and all his accomplishments and blah, blah, blah. And then it says, and we want to thank the parents of this. And I'm reading to my parents. Oh, my God, look, I got this letter, and I'm reading, and the parents are, okay. And I just wrote the letter and I put it away. They did good things, and so they've done really. Zeke, he has, he's my youngest, he's 14 now, I'm sorry, I keep saying 13, he just had a birthday Sunday. So my 14-year-old, he had ADHD and dyslexia, so he didn't read or be able to write and stuff like that, and going through all the services and stuff like that through the school, and he's done so, and he's in journalism. He actually interviewed his new assistant principal for his school. He does the announcements at school. Yeah, and they're both involved in student council. They're just great kids. I mean, so when you're talking about how bad things are, I mean, their case turned out way different. Now, maybe because it's the Kinship program, but to be honest, I knew them very little. I knew actually their older siblings more. When I moved down here, me and my half-sister, we had a little kind of falling out, and so then she kind of kept them away. Later, I kind of realized why we had the falling out, because there was so much stuff going on within their home that the more they kept people out of their home, the better. Everything continued occurring the same because nobody actually knew what was going on. But in all reality, I I blame all the agencies. I was telling them, I was very upset once I thought, when I adopt them, I'm going to sue CPS, I'm going to sue the school district, I'm going to just, I'm going to hurt everyone because so much things happen to them. And I'm thinking, when you have a child, I saw pictures of Carmen when she was little, and she was like way later, but she was like, all I can describe her when I first got her, she was Wednesday. And she dressed that year, I dressed her as Wednesday for Halloween. She was real into herself, real quiet, didn't look, if her hair could be in her face, the better. And I see pictures of her when she was 4 and 5. She was this little smile, she had these little silver teeth, and she was just smiling. And she went from that child to this really inverted child. What happened? Why didn't no one see? I blame myself, but like I say, I moved over here and then I saw them way less. But there was people there, their teachers, that should have seen these things happening in front of their eyes, and nobody cared, you know?
You told a story last week when we talked about, which goes back to Title 40 in the licensing regulations, about them requiring that the house is completed or they're going to remove the kids. Tell that story.
When I bought a home here in Alamo 9 years ago, and when I bought the home, the house was not livable. It was a big house on an acre lot, but it was not livable. So it had a little detached garage in the back, which has a little apartment. It has a little kitchen, a little bathroom, washroom, everything. We lived there, me and my parents, we lived there while we were remodeling the house. So they told me to go pick up the kids. I go get them. Nobody asked me, what are your living arrangements? I technically had one huge room. I thought, well, I guess I'll put mattresses, whatever, and we'll just, make it work, whatever. I go pick them up in Dallas, bring them back. I pick them up December 19th, a couple of days before Christmas. So I'm getting here and I'm like, what do I buy these kids? I don't even know them, what do you have to have Christmas presents? So they get here the next day, I don't know, the 21st or something. We need to go check the living arrangements at your home. And I'm like, ooh, what do you need them to be? Well, we need to have a room for the girls and a room for the boys. And I'm like, oh shit. My house has 4 bedrooms. The home does, which were not prepared. I had 2 rooms fixed. I was fixing like room by room, and I did not want to move in until it was complete. I thought it would be so fabulous. So I'm like, okay. So here we are, like pulling out, because the living room would look like it was a storage building. Everything was there. So we're pulling things out and putting couches and trying to get everything organized so they can come. And we got a bed and threw a mattress on the floor, and I'm gonna get a bed later. And so we're doing all this, and I'm like, well, how many people in their home have 2 extra bedrooms just for foster kids? For someone to show up at your house and just you give them rooms, you don't. Luckily at our home it was a 4-bedroom, and my parents had a room and I had a room, so we could make it work. I had 2 extra rooms, but if you have children or 3-bedroom house and a child, you don't have space for this, and they don't tell you this before. So realistically, had I not been able to do that, what was I going to go buy a house? Let me just go buy another house so that
they would have removed them.
They would have removed them. And
that's happened time and time again.
And I'm like putting beds and this and that, and I'm like, okay, I only have mattresses, but I'm going to get beds. And they're like, no, that's fine. And they come and they're kind of looking around. I'm like, dude, they're going to take these kids. It's going to be my fault. They're going to go into the foster system or whatever. And now it's not on her. I'm thinking, why did I pick them up? Now, if they had gone to foster at their mom's, it would have been her fault. But now if they go to fostering from my home, it's my fault, now I did this. And so it was really stressful. And they kind of work with me, and financially, luckily, I was able to do it. But when you say then later they come 6 months later, since the kids are still there, you need to become a foster parent. And we laugh. What do y'all say when we see a sign that says, become a foster parent? They're like, oh yeah, like that's so easy. They're like, because it's so hard. It's so hard. You see those signs, and now they read them, and it's like, oh, look, foster parents. And they're just like, yeah, people are going to really sign up for that. It's so many steps. Your fingerprints, and the house gets checked. And, we couldn't have cleaning products in our house. Luckily, the detached garage that used to be our house, we had to have all cleaning products over there. So if you, get the dishwashing liquid, go over there. Get the, this, everything had to go over there. The kids were like, really? They left the knives in the house? Because they didn't tell me the knives. So we would laugh. They'd open the doors like, ooh, we have knives. Like Fabuloso, which is a cleaning product. It's purple. They were like, what do they think we think? This is Gatorade? And I was like, yeah, apparently. And so I was like, guys, we're going to clean. This is not to drink. This is to clean the floors. And, it was like a kind of ongoing joke. But they make it really hard to where I can see where a lot of people don't want to do it. At the end of fostering, me and my mom lived together, so we were checking both of us, and they would tell us, my mom had a speeding ticket from 1976. They asked, can you explain on here why she got the ticket and what she learned? In 1976, my mom was like 21 or something, whatever. And I told my mom, says, what? I'm not answering that. You know what? They can do whatever they want. If they need to pick up these, mom. So I'm like forging her thing. I'm putting, from this ticket I learned that speeding is bad and blah, 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 blah. My mom didn't want to sign anymore. And then they were, oh, we need your mom's. I'm sneaking into her room at night, pulling her ID, because we need her ID again. And I already gave them the ID, Margie. What do they need it again? How many times? I'm like, so here I am in the middle of the night, sneaking in there, trying to get an ID or trying to get her social security card to finish this process, because she was like super already tired. Who's here? They'd come and the lights are on, they'd walk in. Kids, do y'all have running water and light? And we're looking like, and they're like, can y'all answer? I'm like, you're seeing the light on, like you're seeing the light on, it's like, but they're asking the bedroom, okay, go to the sink and turn on the water. If you want to see if there's water, they're asking them in their bedroom. And I'm standing right there and they're asking, do y'all feel comfortable? I'm thinking, dude, if you're going to ask these children these questions, at least have me out. Like, look at them, yes, you are, like have me be out of the room so that you can ask them these questions and they can honestly answer, How are they going to honestly answer? And then you're going to leave them there with me. If I was like the worst of the worst and you're asking in front of them and the kids are like, yeah, she's wonderful. If they said, no, she's not, we're very endangered here, we feel scared for our lives or whatever. If they ask in front of them, they're like, okay, guys, have a good day, and they leave them there at the house. I mean, that would be worse for them, So the whole system is bad, to say the least. I mean, but in their case, I say, no, it's good because they're doing wonderful, and I'm very fortunate to have them. But yeah, it's...
And then the licensing, real quick, the licensing regulations have like 57 requirements, and most of that is training and paperwork gathering.
Oh my gosh,
and
classes and
so
classes.
Imagine, and what the stats I didn't bring up is that more than not, our kinship homes are grandparent led. So imagine a 70-year-old trying to get through those licensing
Well, that's my
process.
mom. My mom is 70-something. So when they're asking her, and then we had to take the classes. I mean, I took my classes and her classes because,
Yeah.
Margie, we already took those classes. And I said, I know, Mom, but it's like the thing, and we have to redo. Why? Well, it's just certain times of year. You know what I said this one. I'm not doing it. And I'm, okay, that's fine. And so there I am taking the test, and I was like, dude, you have to have the camera on when you take these tests. And they're just like, oh, no, that's fine. I'm like, okay, so here I'm taking my test and then taking her test and going back and forth between my computer and my laptop just to kind of get them done. Because, yeah, it becomes very tedious. And don't they know we work and this and that? We're cooking dinner right now, and they come here. And I know, Mom, I know. And my mom one time walked in, and they're asking the thing about the light. Do you not see the light on? My mom says, Mom, just over there. Margie, why are they doing this? It's just their job.
Yeah,
Don't they have other families they can go bother?
Right.
And I'm like, look, we see on TV this is happening. Why were they at that house? Why are they here? And I don't know, Mom. Just this is what we have to do, And my mom loves them tremendously, but yeah, it was just.
So it's almost set up where the system is more of like an elimination process instead of an inclusion process.
Exactly.
For kinship.
Yeah.
So it's like, how can I eliminate you and go
Yeah.
seek out something better?
Exactly. Yeah.
And so.
And I was just, I was like, Mom, if they're not here, and on top of that, my half sister is my dad in discretion. So on top of that, they're biologically not my mother's grandchildren, so it didn't make it any easier. Well, I was like, okay, I'm just like the middleman trying to, get this all taken care of. Luckily, we did, and everything turned out great. And my mom since has had a mild stroke, which I was so happy after, not that she had the mild stroke, but that everyone's out of our system. I'm thinking, how would that work if I was still, the kids were still there? Well, how is she going to help you get them here and there when she no longer drives and stuff like that?
You can't provide care anymore, can you?
Yeah, exactly. And I was just like, but they were already adopted, so,
Yeah.
And like you said, how you included the agency that helped us, just fell off the face of the earth. They're nowhere to be found.
It's very rare to have a kinship-focused agency. Well,
the only thing that the counselor that sees them loves seeing them. So if ever we have a little dispute and whatever, and I know that they're seeing it one-sided because I say this and what I say goes, so I kind of have him come back and kind of talk to him and look, this and this is happening, blah, 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 and he'll come back and he'll talk, and I said, there's the insurance if you can take it, whatever, and he said, yeah, and he does charge insurance, but he says, I'll still see these kids, because he says, this is one of my better cases, because not everybody turns out as well as they're turning out or whatever. And he just says it's being strict and loving them at the same time is kind of going to make all the difference.
Hi, I'm Megan with the Dallas Morning News in Dallas, and it sounds like there was a lot of like logistical hurdles, and like they were concerned about like physical living arrangements, which makes sense.
Exactly.
But you mentioned a little bit like a counselor, and then like them asking the kids about like if they were comfortable there. But I'm curious how much you felt like they focused on, is this like a loving, supportive environment, and like did they give you resources, you know, around like, this is how to adjust versus like this is how to make sure there's no cleaning products in the garage?
No, I don't think that they really focused on our adjustment. These were just like the rules that needed to be followed in order for them to be there. And like, I was like, what happens if there's a cleaning product in the house, you know? And it's like, well, you know, certain things, it's like, I don't see, they've never been suicidal. How would that be something to keep us or not keep us? It just didn't seem, I mean, that important or whatever. Since they came, they started doing really well in school. I mean, in the beginning, they went to talk to Zeke's school, but like they never followed through on Carmen's school and things like that, which I thought, you know, just what we say here doesn't reflect. I mean, I would show them report cards and things like that, and they were seeing that they were doing well, flourishing per se, but I don't think that they like go talk to a counselor at their school to see, are the children doing as well? Do y'all have complaints as far as, you know, I mean, because the report card is only going to tell you so much. I expected good grades. I expect good grades. They're like, it's not an option. I mean, you know, I said, we live a certain thing and I want a certain thing for you guys, and I demand y'all do this. This is all y'all do. This is all y'all do. And they're like, well, we do chores. Okay, yeah, everyone does chores. Carmen's first complaint was that she had to wash dishes. I mean, she literally went to her counselor to wash dishes, and the counselor called me and said, Carmen came in and she had some complaints. I'm like, oh my God, like what happened? And she says, yeah, she was upset that she has to wash dishes. I said, well, where you lived before, was there a maid? And she was like, no. She said, well, who washed the dishes? So, well, when there was no more, then we washed the dishes. And he's like, she was, because my kids and then are abused because they have to wash dishes. If I cook, they have to wash dishes. So that's not technically like abuse, you know? And
I got your back. Let's go over here.
Margarita, would it be okay
Yes.
if I ask Carmen and Zeke a question?
oh, yes, go ahead.
Well,
We're gonna do
we're
that
gonna
at the end.
we're gonna wrap this up and then we can do
Where it's
that.
not recorded. Yeah. One question before we
Yes.
transition to that. How can the child welfare system be changed to assist kinship caregivers more effectively? In a perfect world, how would the system have supported you as a kinship family better?
Well, I believe that if it's a kinship and it's family related and normally the kids are going to be safer there, I think that they should have a little bit more leeway for that family versus the same thing as a stranger where you're taking them. I think that for that stranger, they should be a little bit more stricter guidelines to make sure that the children are going to be in a good place versus in a family. Now, and I get also, if, you know, I mean, if the mom is this way, you're assuming that the sister and the aunt and everything are this way. Technically, me and her were not raised together. We have different moms. But, I mean, it has to be per person, judge them per person, not just because it's just fostering the same guidelines are going, because it makes it very hard that if I hadn't tried as hard as I did, they would have been removed. They would have been removed a long time ago, and I don't know where they would be, because the way they would say it was just like, okay, they're gonna. I mean, when the brother got caught with drugs and I had a friend in the police station there in Alamo, and so we were going to do like a scare mechanism because I found out he was smoking marijuana. So we were doing like a scare mechanism. So I had the police, they showed up at the house like they were going to, whatever. But they were just going to kind of scare him straight kind of deal. But as soon as he went out there, he started telling that there was a drug guy that would come and drop off drugs behind the house and blah, blah, blah. He'd call him. So then they did like a sting thing or whatever, and so they took him. And so then once he did a sting, they literally did a sting right behind my house. We're like, oh my God, there's police and this and that. We were like, hey, stay inside, you know? And the boy had a gun, and so afterwards I'm like, we're asleep, and there's a guy bringing drugs behind our house in the alley with a gun, and, you know, we're all in there. I mean, I don't know if they're criminal. I mean, well, obviously they're doing crime, but if they steal or rob or burglarize, I have no idea, you know, but it's like everyone's in a state where you're all asleep, and he's putting us in danger. So when they didn't arrest him because they didn't find any drugs on him enough to arrest him, they called me. They're like, you can come pick him up. And I was like, oh, no, I'm not picking him up. I said, you just did a drug sting. There's going to, I mean, I don't know what drug people do, but I don't want them to do it here, you know, so he can't come back. And they said, oh, well, you signed at CPS. I talked to CPS, and CPS said, you signed a paper that you were taking the children. Okay, I understand. I said, but I didn't know that that meant that I was going to have drugs in my home and drug bust behind my house and stuff like that. I said, you know, he needs to be placed someplace else. And they said, well, we don't have another place, so, you know, you need to go pick him up. And I said, no, hold on. I don't need to do anything. You guys have this child, and you guys need to, I mean, y'all need to make another arrangement for him. I have 2 younger children that I need to think about. If he's already wanting to be a grown-up and do his thing, then that's all good for him, but I don't want to be part of that, you know? And they were like, well, I have here a paper signed of this date, less date, that you were going to be responsible for these children. And I said, okay, that was before this happened. And I said, you know what? Let me tell you something. If you cannot remove him, then you need to come get all of them. And I'm like, dude, I don't want them to take my kids, you know? Like, oh my God. But, you know, you're trying to like kind of play hardball. And so, like, oh, ma'am, calm down. Come get them all. Come get them all. And I'm kind of seeing like, and I'm just like, oh my God, I'm calling bullshit, you know? Like, don't do this, you know? And they were like, okay, that's fine. Let us find a secondary instance. You want to have 3 children on your hands? You want to have 1. It's whatever you want to do. And I'm just sitting here like, oh my God, like, please don't take my babies, you know? And they did it. I mean, it worked out. They did remove the brother. And he comes around every so often, but no, and they're not really involved with them.
I wanted to just ask a quick question, and since I do have you. Dr. Jackson, you mentioned that only 6% of kinship families end up filling out, you know, all of the form to get registered. Did you ultimately get registered? And why do you think that so few families end up registering as
home licensing? Yeah.
Oh,
licensing,
because it's very hard. There's a lot of steps. There's a lot of testing. A lot of.
Did you end up doing it?
Oh yes. I became a foster home for them, because if not, if you don't do this, they're going to be removed, and if you don't do this, they're going to be removed. And it's just like we're already doing well, and the kids are doing well. Why would they even threaten to remove them? They're thriving, you know. But they did. So yeah, we did the.
Yeah, kinship caregivers get that a lot. If you don't do this, they're going to be removed. If they don't do this, you know, it's a lot of threatening.
Yeah.
Because even though the caregivers I work with in my agency are in our safe protection, they still have to deal with that from CPS, telling them that. Then I have to intervene, and they don't want to deal with me because you don't talk to them that way. You're not removing anyone. And,
well, they did.
Yeah.
And we had a lot of things where their mom, where she wanted to have like unsupervised visits. She only came down once in the whole 3 years that we did this. She came down once, but she would, now that I have the whole record of everything that happened, she was calling them to remove them all the time. I don't want them there because she couldn't control the situation, because I was following the rules. I mean, it's like if I am trying to do the best for them, then I have to follow these rules in order for everything to stay good, because if anything finds out, then they're going to remove them, because they keep saying they're going to remove them, and we're going to remove them, so.
In my own journey, I always said if I don't have kids by 35, I'm going to adopt. And then 40, and then 45. And now that I'm 100 years old, it's like it's too old. So when I think of, first of all, Dr. Jackson, I mean, the fact that you do this work, and you've adopted 3 children, I'm sorry. That deserves a round of applause. It's just beautiful. But when I think of you, and you're caring for your parents, obviously, and this situation occurs, and certainly you have the passion and compassion to take them in. But tell us about that decision when it finally came to you that you were going to adopt them and take on that responsibility.
All of a sudden, because to be honest with you, throughout this whole time, even though when the mom only came down one time, and it was through COVID, and we met at Target, and every time we go to Target now, they're like, remember, here's where mom had a breakdown? I'm like, yes, I do remember. She's seeing them, and she's hugging them in the middle of the entryway of the Target, and I'm like, dude, let them go. It's COVID. You know, there's a social distancing. I mean, they don't understand, the family's being reunited in the middle of Target, you know? So I was like, let them go. Come on, let's continue walking. So we're walking, and she's talking to him, and we're nowhere near them being returned home. She hasn't finished services, she hasn't nothing, and she's talking to them, are y'all ready to come home? And they're like, no, we kind of like it here, Mom. Maybe if you moved over here, it would make it easier, blah, blah, blah. They're telling her, and she just all of a sudden, well, F you, blah, 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 and then she starts talking to the other one. And then she's talking to them, and it's kind of the same kind of remark goes on. And all of a sudden, I'm like, I'm walking a little behind them, giving them a little privacy, but I had to be there. So I'm like, as far as me and you, and all of a sudden I hear her screaming F words to the kids, and I'm like, hey, what's going on? I'm talking to my kids. No, you're not, It was like, we're in the middle of a public place. Why are you doing this? Because they're a-holes and blah, 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 and this and that, and she's going on, and I was like, okay, but you can't do this. They haven't seen you in a year, and this is your first And well, afterwards, I talked to CPS, and our CPS worker, he was great. I actually called him the other day telling him that Carmen had got National Honor Society and Zeke had got the thing, and he's like, oh, I'm so happy. He's in Houston now, Mohammed, I don't know what, but he's in the Houston area now, working with CPS. It was really, the whole thing was hard because, you know, she was like upset. But the whole thing about adoption, it wasn't until she went to court, like to actually find out what was going on, and she had talked to them the day before, and they had told her they were happy here for her to move over here and they could stay with me and still see her, you know? And she was not for that, and she cursed them out, hung up on them, whatever. And so the next day was her court. It was a virtual court, and she went and relinquished parental rights because she was mad and blah, blah. And so that's how I got to adopt them.
And then also one thing about kinship care, what again, research that I didn't post, is that kids that go into kinship care actually stay in child welfare much shorter of a period of time. Because for one, they have relatives that have stepped up, so there's a permanent placement there. And in a lot of cases, parents do end up relinquishing because they're thinking, yes, the kids have a good, you know, home with family, and I still get to see them. So.
And right now, when you brought up the rule, the 2008 or something, I thought, wow, I did not know that. But I also had custody of, he's 27 now. When he was 9, I got my biological sister's son. She was on drugs. And I got him through CPS because CPS was involved with them. But I got him, she signed some safety plan with me, and I never saw them again, ever.
Never.
Never. They
Prior
never
to
came
2008.
and checked my home. They never, I could have sold, I said, babe, I could have sold you for organs. I would have been so wealthy. And he's like, really, Deanna? I was
Prior to
like, well, I'm just
2008.
saying, I'm
Yeah,
just saying.
it wasn't even an option.
No one ever came and checked on anything. We ended up moving from Dallas and moved over here.
No
one ever
support, no
knew, no
nothing.
one ever came, no one ever nothing. So then when I got them, and they were there every day, and somebody was here, and somebody said, I'm like, oh my gosh, this is a lot. I'm thinking, well, okay, luckily last time they left us alone.
We are at the end of the formal session of this discussion, but I think what we've seen here is the embodiment of love and support being the number one things that children need. And as we've been talking about this morning, sometimes the system cannot provide that. And we have to turn the conversation around and try to get us back to that. So frankly, I think all of your children are the luckiest children I've met or heard of in quite some time. So at this point, I'd like to thank Dr. Valerie Jackson and Margarita Arizmendi for joining us for this discussion about kinship care. So let's show them our appreciation.